Tonight, I'll be narrating Flamingo by Saturdead. I was at an after-work mixer not that long ago. Nothing big, just a gathering with some out-of-towners. We had a couple of drinks and got to talking about the most unusual parts of our job. Nowadays, I work in bookkeeping, but I've been doing evaluation and audits back in the day. At 4 drinks in, the conversation drifted to where it always goes. Your weirdest job story. Now, I told them this stupid anecdote about an old man who wanted to evaluate his vast collection of erotic art. It's a funny story that never fails to get a laugh, but that's not my weirdest job story. That story doesn't do quite as well at parties. But just this once, I'd like to tell it. I'd like to tell you about Flamingo. Some time ago, I did evaluations for a firm specializing in liquidation of company assets. Basically, when something went bankrupt, we were called in to evaluate the worth of leftover inventory, assets, and whatever else was legally owned by the company in question. This is not exciting work. More often than not, we got it all on paper on day one. We just had to make sure it was really there. Glorified fact checkers. It was a scorching hot summer. My allergies were acting up, and the news was flooded about this missing 10-year-old girl. She'd been gone for days, and the video of her family pleading to the public was on repeat. Not a lot happened in that one area of the world, so this would be the biggest story of the year by far. I was practically melting through the floor when my boss dropped by my desk, fanning himself with a folder. "You got the email?" he asked. "What? No." "Okay, good." He sat down next to me, dropping the folder on my desk. "I was planning on sending you and Dawn on this, but Dawn has got to take some time off." "I got it. It's fine." "No, see, this is bigger than usual. I ain't sure what to make of it." "What do you mean?" "There's a lot of questions here, and we don't have a lot of answers. It's not just gonna be checking some files. It's a lot. That's why I wanted to send Dawn too, but..." He shrugged, giving me an apologetic smile. He tapped me on the shoulder and turned as he walked away. "Just take your time with this one," he said. "Do it right." Shortly after, I got an email about a private company that was getting liquidated. It was a small, privately owned tech company based out of South Dakota. The sole elderly owner had recently passed in a home invasion gone wrong, and the board had decided to liquidate the company in its entirety. We'd gotten a couple of years' worth of documentation, but this company had been up and running since the 70s. I was going to be standing literally neck deep in paperwork. No wonder my boss wanted Dawn to help out. We got most of the paperwork sent to the office later that day. I had to sign off on box after box being dropped off at the door. I almost tore my back out carrying them all in, and the heat wasn't helping. The boxes were immaculately labeled, but we were talking decades of work. Financing, projections, board meetings, budgeting, personnel files. It was all there. By the time I had it all lined up, I had accidentally built myself a cubicle. I hadn't played in a box fort for years, but this was a decent enough substitute. I didn't know where to begin. Usually, we got something to start with, but this was just dropped off and that was that. I had to start with the most recent reports and work my way back. There wasn't that much to be excited about. Those first few days, I listed assets like a company car and a regional office. There was also a rented storage space. I found some receipts for office equipment and a couple of computers, but most of them were from the early 2000s. I think it was somewhere in the delivery receipts that I first noticed the word Flamingo. It snapped me back to attention for a moment. It's not the kind of thing you expect to read in a budgeting report, but it was right there. Flamingo. It wasn't a big cost, but big enough to be included in the yearly budget. No further explanation, no details, just Flamingo. I put it aside for a while, but I noticed the word coming up every now and then as I looked through the files. Sometimes it'd show up in delivery receipts, other times in R&D or even storage. I could be reading about Microsoft Office subscriptions and then wham, Flamingo. It catches your attention, especially when you have no idea what it means. I was about 1 full week into mapping the company assets when my boss got a call. Apparently, while we were still working on processing inventory, someone had broken into the regional office. The police were asking for someone to come down and do inventory, asking if there was any way to know what'd been stolen. Someone had to go to South Dakota, and it wasn't gonna be Don. He still had some time off. I drove out on a Tuesday, windows down, blasting cold air, having an iced tea in my cup holder. The radio was still going on and on about this missing girl, but the tone had turned somber. It was no longer about finding her alive. It was more about recovery and finding out what really happened to her. They were speculating, drawing parallels to other missing children, asking uncomfortable questions, and pointing fingers at those in power who hadn't done enough. It was a nice distraction, even if the subject matter was morbid. It was a long drive, but the one-story office building was easy to find. They'd taken down the signs, and it was the only parking space that was completely empty, save for a squad car. 2 officers were ready to meet me up front. I had printed out a list of items that I suspected would be at the office according to the most recent receipts. Just the big stuff. I figured burglars wouldn't be looking for staplers and reams of paper. If they just got away with some copiers and computers, we could probably get an insurance payout. There were 2 officers out front. They waved me over and escorted me inside, keeping the small talk to a minimum. Just a couple of lines and how about this weather? I couldn't blame them. One of them was on the chubbier side, and he was melting through his uniform. There was no doubt the place had been robbed. The front door was smashed to pieces. I had to step over the glass as I made my way inside. "You know what's strange?" the chubby one said. "The door opens inward, but it's been smashed the other way." "Why's that strange?" I asked, glass crackling under my feet. "I mean, if they could get in, they could get out. Why break the door? Hell, the lock's still there, see?" He used his flashlight for emphasis. I nodded at him, taking a closer look. He was right. The entire door had been smashed to pieces from inside the office, torn straight from the hinges, and the lock was seemingly untouched. The officers left me to do their job, asking me to call once I was finished, so they could get a proper report about missing or damaged items. I was left on my own for a while as I went around taking pictures, double-checking with my list of confirmed assets. Now, the place was admittedly a mess, but not as bad as one might imagine. The lights were working just fine, and most of the furniture was okay. A couple of things had been tipped over, and the drawers in one of the desks had been thrown to the floor, but all the electronics were still there. In fact, I couldn't see that anything had been stolen. Not anything big, at least. One thing stood out though. At the far end of the room, there was a supply closet. The door was broken in 2, and all the boxes inside were scattered to the floor. One of the boxes had been torn to shreds. An old, dust-caked box with a yellow note taped to the side. Flamingo. After talking to the police, I decided to take some time to look closer at what exactly Flamingo was supposed to be. There were a couple of notes here and there, but it was always separated by a degree of vagueness. For example, I noticed that there were gas receipts about once per month when one of the employees went on a longer drive. That always coincided with a pattern of other receipts for things such as glycerin, antifreeze, and something described as compound 5 mix B. Same pattern over and over. Now, I didn't have a clear idea of what Flamingo was supposed to be, but there were some patterns emerging. It was something that had been ongoing since the 70s, up to the point of the company's liquidation. Some kind of ongoing thing that was only shut down once the company lost its funding. Flamingo wasn't that expensive, but it was definitely recurring. There had to be something else to it. Some kind of documentation that showed what the hell we were dealing with. At the very least, I needed some kind of description so I could do my job. I can't evaluate something if I don't know what it is. While in town, I decided I should check out the storage space. I had a pretty good idea of the kind of things they kept there, but I figured I might as well double check. I'd had the keys delivered earlier that week, and it wasn't a long drive. Might as well. It was a private storage space as part of a larger warehouse location. Basically, a walled-off section lined with chain-linked fences. It was already late in the afternoon by the time I got there, but just getting out of the sun for a while was enough to energize me. I was drowsy from my antihistamines, something I kept chewing like candy to deal with my dust allergy. Did you know those things are basically sleeping pills? Yawning, I got to the storage space. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. I was the only one there as I closed and locked the door behind me, turning on the lights. The moment the light turned on, something moved. I heard things getting knocked over and clattering to the floor as something crashed into the light overhead, breaking the glass and turning the room dark. My pulse exploded as I pressed myself back against the door, fumbling for the lock. "I'm calling the police!" I yelled out. "You're not supposed to be here! I'm calling the..." I got the door open. As light flooded back into the room, I realized how quiet it was. I pulled up my phone, ready to call for help. As a couple of seconds stretched into a full minute, nothing happened. I started to doubt myself, thinking maybe something had just toppled over, or a raccoon was hiding inside. It would be silly to call for help over a wild animal, so I decided to take a closer look. There was nothing in there apart from a strange black mark on the floor. There was this smell of ozone in the air, so I kept the door open to flush it out. The glass from the broken light littered the floor, along with a couple of open boxes. It didn't surprise me to see that these were labeled Flamingo. A lot of other labeled boxes in that room were untouched. Looking through the boxes, these seemed mostly untouched. There were tapes, camera equipment, folders, and a box of what looked like turkey basters made of stainless steel. All the boxes had been ripped open and looked through, but nothing had been removed. They were stuffed to the brim with a variety of items. I picked one of the boxes at random, marked Flamingo 1981. It wasn't a large or even heavy box, but it was taped shut. I opened it just to have a look. First thing I saw was a children's drawing in crayon. It was kind of hard to tell what it was supposed to be, but it looked like a portrait. A child, 2 parents, and 2 doctors. On the bottom, a text. "Thanks for snow globe." I loaded up my car with a couple more boxes and took some pictures of the more expensive items. I was surprised to see medical equipment. This was supposed to be a software company. I returned to that crayon drawing a couple of times, taking a closer look. I couldn't tell if the child was a boy or girl. They didn't have any hair. They also had the outlines of their body drawn in a gray crayon, not a pink one like the parents or the doctors. The reference to a snow globe could be seen in the picture, as one of the doctor characters was holding one out like a present. I decided to call it a night. I checked into a motel and closed the curtains. I'd have to wait to check the videotapes until I got back to the office. I didn't want to plug anything into a motel TV. Instead, I browsed whatever was left. Photos, reports, test results. Once you got past the Flamingo description, there were a couple of names that kept coming back. One of them was Christine, or Chrissie. It didn't take a lot of digging to connect her to the crayon drawing. A lot of the reports were transcripts from her discussions with one of the doctors, as well as observations made by staff. Most of them were fairly short descriptions, like a kind of progress report, something that was meant to be added to an ongoing file. Other names were those of doctors and software developers. It seems they were using some kind of program to figure out a solution to a problem that affected Chrissie. Exactly what wasn't clear, but they perfected something they called Compound 5 Mix B. What exactly that entailed wasn't clear. Something about seeds, an echo drive, and synthetic nutrition. There was a whole section written about the physical effects of consuming antifreeze related to this. But what really stood out to me were the observations about Chrissie. She'd been part of Flamingo since the 70s, just after the founding of the company. Some of the observations about her were absurd. Day 465. Still unable to enter REM sleep. Day 476. Confirmed independent eye movement and dual cognition. Cross-report 8. Day 877. Procedural breach found in parking lot. Day 1022. Tongue atrophy. The reports hinted at this girl in need of medical attention, but it wasn't clear as to why. They were working on some kind of solution and had been for a long time. Whatever it was, it resulted in some kind of compound that they had been producing until recently. Something that, even when written out, didn't make sense to me. What the hell is a Helianthus cerulea anyway? It was almost 1 a.m. when I turned off my lights and closed all the boxes. I crawled into bed, barely keeping my eyes open. I've never liked sleeping in unfamiliar places. There's always noise that you're not used to. Luckily, I was out like a light the moment my face hit the pillow. In the morning, as I put on my jeans, I turned my head. My alarm didn't go off. I rubbed the sleep out of my eyes, only to see the boxes I'd checked were wide open. I'm sure I closed them. The boxes had a lot of old media, like cassettes and VHS tapes, but there were a couple of CDs that seemed a bit more recent. My car stereo was pretty old school, so I tried to put something on to listen to on the way back. It was gonna be a long drive, and I figured I might as well get acquainted with the material. Most of the CDs didn't work, or had text files rather than audio, but a couple of them included what sounded like recorded conversations. They all started the same, reciting the date and the name of present staff members. Same names over and over. They didn't mention who they were talking to, but I had a sneaking suspicion. One of the recordings went something like this. Are you still experiencing issues with your vocal cords? There was a murmur in the background, Then a clicking noise.
I see. No effect from the inhaled sulfur?
2 clicks.
Sorry to hear that. Any other recent issues you've experienced in your new environment?
There was 1 click. The person in the recording could be heard shuffling around some equipment, only to spell out letters. A couple of things were brought to attention, such as food, tired, and finally, broke. That seemed to get the interviewer's attention.
Broke? What broke?
He asks. They spelled out the word globe.
We'll get you an extra one after your next session. How's that?
1 click. Some stories end when the words stop. Others don't end at all. If you enjoyed this story, there are many more waiting in the dark. Until next time.